Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Pink Mike Legal Confessions. As you know, I'm Stephanie Garces-Donay. Thank you so much for joining us for our episode today, where we're going to be covering how mortgage modifications programs are helping consumers in select U.S. locations. And I'm going to be introducing our wonderful guest today. He's an expert in this, Igor, and I know that you're going to be telling us a little bit more about you, but I was told you were the expert, so I believe you are one. So just as a way of background for those of you who, some people were actually messaging me, asking me about what this topic was about. So just to kind of wrap up, a quick intro here. Countless Americans, as we know, are struggling to bounce back after COVID because of missed mortgage payments. I know a lot of people have lost work. Perhaps they don't have the same income that they had once before. So on this week's Pink Mike Legal Confessions, we are sitting down with attorney and our expert in loan modifications, Igor Roitberg. I'm saying that right, to learn more about the court-approved programs that allows consumers to request modifications on their loans, their mortgages specifically, with a licensed attorney. And so this is really important because if you don't even know this is a option, I hope that you know it by the time this show is over, because it's so important for our consumers to understand really what it is that we offer, the viewers, as far as knowledge and things that you may not necessarily know unless you go and Google it, which Google for the most part has most of the stuff that you need, but it doesn't necessarily replace a licensed attorney, which I've preached about many times in this show. So yeah, like I said, I'm Stephanie Garces-Donay. I'm the owner of Garces Law Firm, where we help parents secure their legacy in the event of an unexpected absence in their life. So with no further ado, my colleague here, Igor Roitberg, has joined us today. So just as a background, he's the managing director of Stretto. He's one of the co-founders of DMM Portal that law firms use to manage the mortgage modification process. Igor, thank you so much for joining me. Can you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Thank you for having me, Stephanie. Yeah, sure. So as you said, I am one of the co-founders of the DMM Portal. And what the DMM Portal is it's a tool, or it's a set of tools, I should say, that helps borrowers and their attorneys get mortgage modifications. We started this back in 2008, and for the last 12 plus years, I've been working with bankruptcy courts across the country mostly to help facilitate mortgage modifications. So we're very well aware of what the problems in the industry have been, and I've been working for the last 12 plus years to try and solve those issues. And today, currently, we have over 20 different jurisdictions across the country that use our systems and our programs, and we've helped tens of thousands of people get mortgage modifications through our system very quickly and efficiently.
Wow, that's amazing. And so when you said this is available, so this is something that if any of our viewers are from out of state or in Illinois or outside of Illinois, this would be readily accessible to them as well. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, our programs, we tend to work with certain courts that pass their programs. Not every court has a program, but we are working with courts all across the country for the ones that don't currently have them to hopefully have them adopted very shortly, because the courts that do have them are having tremendous success and other courts are noticing. And we're very optimistic that you're going to see this nationwide very soon.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, I was checking out your website before before our podcast, and I knew that it was something different. I know that people see loan modifications are in the attorney world. We talk about those all the time. We actually get calls about that a lot because we do a lot of real estate, a lot of estate planning, probate work, where sometimes the mortgage people have just not paid, or they're just behind because of work or something like that they've lost, or something has changed in their dynamic that has really forced them to consider a potential loan modification. And so now, while COVID, I know that there's been measures taken to relieve some of the stress and some of the stuff that the American people are going through, but those preventative measures are going to expire soon, right? So really, the loan modification, even though loan modification is one avenue. I know there's a lot of other avenues about forbearance and whatnot, and maybe we talk about that later, which is not the same thing. So let's make sure we make it clear, right? Not the same thing. I always tell people that because I'm like, it's totally different. Even though it sounds attractive, and yes, we're talking about it in the abstract, but they're two different objectives. And so I just want to make sure people understand that. We'll talk about that today. So kind of to talk about a few talking points today, Igor, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what is the difference, in your opinion, about the housing crisis post-pandemic, maybe now and what you're seeing now, as opposed to what was going on in 2008 when the market crashed? I mean, what is the biggest difference that you're seeing?
So, in my opinion, one of the biggest differences between now and the 2008 crisis is the 2008 crisis sort of started from the financial markets and the housing values, whereas this was an external shock to our system. And what concerns me most about what's happened this time around is people have lost their jobs. And at the end of the day, even those that have found jobs, some of them may not be operating at the same income levels that they were.
Right.
So I think that's, concerning, because at the end of the day, any program or any way to put people back on their feet has to depend on them having income. So I think that's a major difference. And another major difference is, I think that the financial institutions have gone through this once recently. There's been some learning and some experience as to how to address this. And hopefully with tools such as ours, we've made it a little bit easier, there's a greater process and a better process for people to hopefully find solutions. So I think there's some good and some bad, but hopefully net will be able to facilitate more modifications and put people back on their feet a lot more quickly and help them keep their homes.
Sure. So just to track back, because I did tell the viewers I was going to basically explain this, so if you could explain loan modifications in the most simplest term, how would you describe that, just so that our viewers understand what it is that we're mentioning when we say that?
Stephanie, that's a great question, because a lot of people sometimes don't understand the difference between a modification and a refinance, right?
Yes.
And what a modification is you have an existing loan, right? You've agreed to pay X percentage over X number of years in a particular payment. There's a contract between the borrower and the lender to make a payment. A modification basically allows the mortgage servicer, which is a fancy term for the company that's responsible for administering the loan, collecting the payments, and all that other stuff. The modification essentially allows that servicer, within their rules and guidelines, to help the borrower obtain a different payment. Right. So, and a lot of times it really depends on who the investors are, what the contractual rights are. But essentially, they look at things like changing the interest rate, changing the term of the loan. Some cases they will extend the loan up to 480 months. Capitalizing missed payments, which basically means folding them back in. So it is basically working with the existing loan that you have and changing the terms, which is not to be confused with something like a refinance, right? Where you go out and you actually are getting a brand new loan with a brand new lender, and you are paying off the existing loan. With a modification, you are working with the existing loan and just changing the terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a caveat to this as well, different than the two things we mentioned, refinance and loan modification, is the third option, which I want to talk about, this forbearance thing, because I talked about it before. But forbearance, could you maybe dive into that a little bit? I mean, I realize to us, because we talk about it all the time, there, the attorney world is completely separate in our mind of like, you can compartmentalize. But, I think about, like, if I wasn't an attorney, if I was just, if I was a consumer, when you listen to like ads, the way that they, advertise for forbearance makes it sound really attractive. But Igor, what is your thought on that? Can you dumb that down for me? Because I'm trying to think of the simplest way to say it. Maybe I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, sure. So a forbearance, to me, a forbearance is a little bit like out of sight, out of mind, in the sense that all it basically does is it puts a pause on the payments, in terms of the lender or the mortgage servicer physically collecting the payment. It doesn't do anything to change the terms of the loan. It doesn't do anything to change the amount that's due or the interest rate or anything like that. So in a lot of ways, I almost think of it sort of as an ostrich sticking its head in the sand, where it's like you don't see it, out of sight, out of mind, right? And it's okay, but it's very, it's temporary relief. And it really doesn't do anything to solve the root cause or the problem. It just delays the day of reckoning. And in some cases could make it more difficult, because the longer you don't make those payments, the more they compound and add up and then have to be addressed at some point down the road, because that money is not forgiven. That money is not forgotten. It's just simply the servicer saying, we're going to put a pause on it. And with COVID in particular, because there were so many shutdowns that emanated from the government itself, the government said, look, we're causing this, so we're also going to tell you to put a pause, right? If these loans are connected to the federal loans, we're going to put a pause on collecting it because we understand that we've made it difficult for you to have, your jobs, do things that you normally would do. So we're going to put a pause on collection. That doesn't mean that loan is going away. And it doesn't mean that the missed payments or the payments that haven't been made are going to be forgotten. They will have to be addressed in one form or another.
Absolutely. And that's what I want the viewers to understand today, because when you think about forbearance, it's nice to not have to make payments because of your financial, downturn in maybe, or a moment that you had at work where you're no longer employed, or sometimes they've even been furloughed and hired back. But whatever the case may be, you still owe the money. So that's the difference between a refinance, a forbearance, and the loan modification. Very different things. So Igor, I know we talked a lot about bankruptcies in general in the courts. So this is interesting to me because I don't practice bankruptcy, but I will say I do understand the basic knowledge of the fact that these courts are now seeing, or maybe even adjusting to what's going on. So what are you seeing the bankruptcy courts do to oversee the programs that are in place? And can you kind of elaborate on what some of the court-approved programs are?
Sure. So, the court-approved programs, for those people who don't know, in bankruptcy court, you deal with, obviously, your debts. But interestingly enough, because your mortgage is secured by real property, that's not something that the bankruptcy code deals with head on. And so what a lot of times happens is they'll basically tell people that, the borrower and the lender, go deal with your mortgage over here on the side and not part of the overall bankruptcy. And so what our programs basically do is the court says, look, we understand we can't tell you what to do, how to modify the mortgage. We understand you're a secured creditor. Nobody's trying to do that. But we also recognize that this process is very important to the debtor, that mortgages tend to be the largest debt that people have. And so we also understand that the process of a mortgage modification can be very complicated and very difficult to navigate. So what we're going to do is just simply provide some basic infrastructure for how the borrower and the lender are to communicate with each other, how they exchange documents, how they exchange information. And we're just basically going to facilitate that process and make sure that the parties are working towards getting a resolution. Many people may have heard, particularly in the 2010, 2011, 2012, when there were a lot of mortgage modifications being done. I'm sure a lot of people heard about all the frustrations about submitting documents being lost and having to go back and forth and through that process. Our systems and these court programs basically provide the tools and the infrastructure that borrowers and lenders need to have a streamlined process and get these things resolved. In our model programs, we're seeing reviews done and completed in about 30 to 45 days, which is unheard of because they typically take 15 to 20 months.
Yeah, no kidding. Talk about time is money, right? People always think, I love using that term because I think about as more innovative things are more available to consumers and to attorneys and to the courts, time is money. So less money is spent overall, because if you think about 15 to 20 months, it's a long time for anyone to be waiting on something like this. So with these court programs, you said that more and more places are adopting them. So in your experience, who has been adopting them and who is still kind of thinking about it?
I think what we're seeing is it's really there are courts all across the country that, as they learn about them and understand how beneficial they are to their debtors, and even honestly to the lenders themselves, because notwithstanding the fact that I know a lot of people, especially at the height of the mortgage crisis, thought that lenders are trying to foreclose, they want to foreclose. They don't. They really would prefer a performing loan. But the problem is, again, if you remember what I was talking about with the mortgage modifications, it's redoing an existing loan. There are contracts in place, there are agreements in place, there are investors in place, right? And so you have to follow certain guidelines. And unfortunately, that means that there are a lot of papers that need to be exchanged, a lot of information that needs to be exchanged. Every I has to be dotted, every T has to be crossed. And any misstep in the process can sort of set you back to square one. And what these programs do is, again, try and keep everybody on the straight and narrow. And in terms of, across the country, we're everywhere from the East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, Southwest, North, everyone is starting to see the benefit of these things and understanding that the court doesn't have to dictate a result, right? But the court can certainly say, okay, here's your sandbox over here. Go play nicely here, get this resolved, and come back to us with the result. And like I said, because the process is more efficient, you don't have more missed payments, right? Because we talked about 15, 20 months, right? What's happening to all those payments? They're just being tacked on, right? And if you can address that problem sooner, it's a lot easier to deal with, $5,000 in arrears than $50,000 in arrears.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the questions I always get is, especially with people that are struggling and thinking about loan modifications, but they don't really know the impact it could or could not have. What is the, let's say, the lasting effects of a loan modification for purposes of credit or people trying to sell? Is there anything that they should be worried about, or is there nothing associated to that?
The reality of it is, with a modification, things can only get better. You can't change the past. So to the extent that you've got missed payments, it's going to be a ding on your credit, right? But the sooner you can get onto a modified plan, onto a modification, and start making those payments and having those payments, which hopefully are a little bit more affordable, right? That will get you on the straight and narrow path. And it's important to note that some of the programs, for example, you may have heard of Fannie and Freddie and FHA. They obviously are backed by the federal government. They own about 50% of the loans, or have an interest in about 50% of loans. And their programs are specifically designed to reduce the borrower's payment by at least 20%, right, on the principal and interest. Right. So that's the goal, because they understand that the reason why the borrower is in this mess is because they couldn't afford the payment, right? So their programs and the tools that they have by lowering the interest rate, extending the term, maybe putting some of the interest and the amounts that have been missed to the back of the loan, all of those things are designed to try and create a more affordable payment, which is why the modification can be such a beneficial thing in getting people back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about it, the banks also like this option because of the reasons you just mentioned. I mean, the bank rather work something out with the consumer as far as new terms, new interest rates, and all of that, as opposed to just not having you pay it all and then completely defaulting on the loan. Because some people really have this school of thought of, I'll just forget about it. I'll just walk away. And that's horrible, a horrible way to think, because, there are lasting effects of something like that. So I get a lot of calls on that, and I'll tell people, I could never advise you to in good conscience to just walk away and never pay, or to move to another country. Because again, it follows you forever, right? Your credit is it's just a ding. So a loan modification, just so everyone's aware, like Igor said, there's good things that come of it. Only things can go up from there instead of backwards. So thank you for highlighting that. So what options do people have now, and the potential challenges that they could they could experience if they wait to make payments once they become due, like in general, in your opinion?
All right. So let's go back to your topic of forbearances for a second, right? Because millions of people have been put on forbearance plans, right? So there's all these payments that haven't been made, right? And now you're going to have to address those, right? So there are programs that are coming out, Fannie, Freddie, private mortgage servicers, all of these companies are going to have to figure out a way to deal with these forbearances, right? And I know that I've heard a lot of rumors of people saying, well, you're just going to have to pay the full amount, right? The reality of it is most people aren't going to be able to do that. And the reality of it also is that Fannie and Freddie have come out and said, that's not what we expect you to do, right? If you can, great. That's the best option for everybody, right? But if you can't, there are going to be different programs. They are developing different repayment plans, and the options, I think, will evolve, and you'll see what programs are available. People may remember the word HAMP, right? The federal government came out with the HAMP program, which was a set of tools and a set of programs that they allowed servicers to modify mortgages to a certain targeted level of their income payment at 31%, right? I expect to see servicers doing similar things and designing and developing programs and plans to make sure that people are able to afford their homes based on their existing incomes that they're receiving at that time. And again, that will require some documentation, some information, and that's what our systems are designed to do. Help you understand what that is, help you put that together, and help you get through the process of getting that reviewed.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for explaining that, Igor. And I just want to do a quick recap because some people just joined us now. To recap, my name is Attorney Stephanie Garces-Donay. I'm the owner of Garces Law Firm, where we help children and families stay protected in the event of an unexpected absence in your family. Today, we're talking about a very important topic, very relevant to the world and everything that's going on, how mortgage modifications programs are helping consumers in certain U.S. locations. And I have Igor Rotberg with me, who's giving us wonderful knowledge about Stretto. He's an attorney and managing director there. That talks a lot about, we'll be talking a lot about modifications and forbearance and refinancing, what the difference is. So just so you know, legal technology organizations, kind of like yours, are really the future. And so it's great for people to understand what is out there, and the fact that there's court-approved programs that are now being developed and are already available for you as an option, so that if you are watching today and you don't know if you can afford your mortgage payment that's coming up or haven't been able to pay them, there are options for you. So just know that as we continue to the discussion. So, and it really quick, if you missed our last episode, we covered a very important topic for some of you parents whose kids are now in college. We talked about college selection, what to expect in challenges and really the issues that a lot of students and young students face in today's world. So you can watch a recording on our YouTube channel or on Facebook anytime you want to catch up. So I know a couple of people have questions regarding some of the topics we've been discussing today. So here's one that just came in from one of the audience members. Someone is asking, if I miss mortgage payments in general, am I disqualified from refinancing on my home?
You're not going to, again, it depends on the circumstances. You're not going to be disqualified per se, but you will probably end up paying a higher interest rate if a refinance is available, and not all lenders will participate in, in a refinance of a property that's in default. So your choices are a little bit more limited. So you're not disqualified per se from a refinance, but it is a little bit harder than if you had, perfect credit and a perfect, payment history.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's all like, it depends. Like a lot of viewers ask questions specifically, but it really depends, because every lender also looks at things a little bit differently. But for the most part, they consider it. It doesn't mean that you're disqualified, but they certainly consider it. So I would still think about refinancing. I mean, refinance can always be a good option depending on what your goals are. So make sure that you don't disqualify yourself. Hopefully that answers the question. We had another question come in kind of similar to what we just discussed, but it says, if I cannot make any of the missed payments so far, will the lender automatically foreclose on my home?
Eventually they will, but it depends on which state you're in. Foreclosures are governed by state law. And some states foreclose more quickly than others. Some take a while. So eventually, yes. But the reality of it is, you should be getting notices. And again, there should be opportunities for you to do a modification, to reach out to your lenders. I really do want to stress, Stephanie, to your audience, that lenders and their mortgage servicers are more than happy to work with their borrowers to try and see if there are resolutions. They don't want to rush to foreclosure. It costs them a lot of time. It costs them a lot of money. It's not a result that's beneficial for anybody. Eventually, if they're left no choice, that's what ends up happening. But it's not, the first choice. So if you find yourself in that position, seek counsel, seek someone that can help you, and try and get a mortgage modification or some other resolution to your issues with your home payments.
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that, some viewers were asking just now about where can they find those types of programs, like as far as loan modification. So where would be the first stop for them to check in if they can do that?
So that's an excellent question, because you can check out, for example, if your loan is owned by Fannie or Freddie, and there are links, if you just look up Fannie lookup or Freddie lookup, it'll tell you whether or not your loan is owned by them. And they have a program called FlexMod, FLEX mod, and you can look up at that and you can see the rules. Now it's a government program with government rules, so it's somewhat challenging to make your way through it.
Yeah. It's super dry, probably.
Right. But that's part of the challenge in all this, Stephanie, is that there is not there's not an encyclopedia or a resource of loan modification programs that you can look at. And a lot of it depends on who your investor is, what the programs are. Is it privately backed? Is it federally backed? And, we literally just this week, we saw a debtor in one of our programs get a modification where all of us, we thought that the chances of getting a modification were not great just because of the nature of what we were seeing. And sure enough, though, the servicer found a program for them to be at. So one of the things that I always advise people, because we always get this question, right? Everybody wants that direct answer. Do I qualify? How do I know if I qualify, right? And unfortunately, it's very hard to give someone a black and white answer. Yes, you do. No, you don't. And because of what's at risk, meaning your home, right? We always recommend to people, go seek the right advice, go get the right counsel, and make an application for a modification, because I have seen borrowers that I thought had very, very limited opportunities to get a modification, get them, because you just don't know what's happening behind the scenes. There could have been, your loan could have been sold to someone else. They have more flexibility. You just don't know until you try. So given what's at risk, I always recommend that people take the shot, because you have absolutely nothing to lose. The worst thing that's going to happen is that you're going to be right back where you started from. And, but the best thing that's going to happen is you're going to get a modification. You're going to get a lower payment. You're going to keep your home.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if you have a family, that's the roof over their head. So to give it a shot, because a lot of times I think people get, there's a sense of, emotion besides the fact that behind the fact that you can't pay your mortgage, or you lost your job, or you're asking for a modification. But it's actually very common, I think, right? I've seen a lot of people actually do this when I do their real estate work. I've seen loan modifications actually, I would say, more often than not. And it's not a thing that, you have to announce to the world, but it's certainly something that can help you keep that home that you would want to keep, instead of just, again, just kind of thinking there's no out. There always is at least an option to determine whether or not you would qualify for something like that.
Absolutely, Stephanie. And what I'd also add, and this, even when you don't get a modification, right, which happens sometimes, right, if you're not getting a modification, once you engage with your lender and or mortgage servicer, there may be opportunities that they are required to explain to you why you don't qualify, right? So the best part of this is you will either get a modification, will understand why you don't qualify, which sometimes helps deal with the issues, as opposed to feeling like somebody's foreclosing and nobody's listening to you. And then sometimes they have programs to help you, gracefully move out of the house, give you the time that you need, right? Cash for keys, deeds in lieu, right? And in many cases, they'll pay you money, right, to give them the deed to the title, because it helps them. And then that can help you, find an apartment, or find, somewhere else to live, and have a smoother transition. Sometimes there is not, you're choosing between a bad answer and a worse answer, right? And there just isn't a great solution, but hopefully through this process, you can find the best solution available to you at that time. And so again, really just encourage people, don't despair, don't become despondent, take matters into your own hands, find people that can help you, because it is a complicated process, and seek the help that you need, and find out what your options are. And you may be surprised what you'll find.
Yeah, and Igor, just to kind of go back on that, one of the things I always talk about, and you heard me say at the beginning, is a lot of people may not want to hire an attorney to do this for them. What is your advice regarding that, especially those that are thinking, well, I can just do it myself?
So I would say, I would basically,
I know. It's like how do you answer that without sounding like completely silly? Because a lot of people do say, well, I'll just go online, because I can or I go on a website that'll tell me what to do or something.
Right. And the reality is, the best way I describe this stuff, Stephanie, is like this. I can go file my own taxes myself, right? I don't dare do that because I don't want to mess it up, and I don't want to have the IRS come knocking on my door in 3 years and tell me that I screwed up my taxes, right? Yes. Some people may get lucky. Some people are incredibly diligent and understand all of this stuff, and will be able to do it. And there's certainly a subset of people that can and are equipped to do that. What I will tell you, though, is that just like with filing your taxes, if you retain an expert like an attorney who's done this multiple times, who understands the process a lot better than you do because they've done it hundreds of, if not thousands of times. Day in and day out. they understand where the bodies are buried, right? They understand how to present a package. They understand how to do the things, how to resolve things. And again, keep in mind that mortgage modifications very similar to getting your mortgage in the first instance. So obviously, if you're looking for a mortgage modification, you've gone through the process of getting that mortgage in the first place. So think back to all those, hundreds of pages of documents that you had to sign and some closer was putting in front of you, and you're like, what the heck is that, right? It's a very similar thing, except now you don't have anybody helping you figure out which documents. Now you have a default. So now not only are you dealing with that original mortgage, you're dealing with all those other things surrounding it, right? So there's no shame in asking for help. And I think, there's the old saying, a wise man knows what he does not know. And it's, I think, very important for people to sometimes recognize that, there's a bevy of websites and some unscrupulous companies out there that will tell you, hey, I'll solve all your mortgage modifications, right? You have to, find someone that you can rely on. I think the chances of success are significantly higher through these programs and having an expert by your side than trying to do it on your own. It just is, right? It's like if you were going to, I could probably figure out how to fix, my kitchen sink, right? I'd probably flood my kitchen floor a couple of times before I figured it out, right? Which is why I would hire a licensed plumber instead, right?
Yeah.
So again, you can figure this stuff out maybe, but you're probably better off, particularly given what's at stake, finding someone that can help you through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention, I mean, it's not an easy process, right? So if you even attempted to do it yourself and, kind of like the tax situation, if you would have just hired someone else and had a more favorable outcome, you don't want to kick yourself later and say, oh, I should have just hired someone, because later it's too late, right? If you come back later and you've already messed the application up, well, that's very difficult to undo because it was already submitted. So just keeping that in mind. I mean, I really do like people thinking about these things, because there is value in having an attorney at least help you with the loan modification. And I have a feeling, Igor, I don't know if you agree with me on this or not, but it's going to become more frequent and popular as things continue to unravel now that everything's opening back up. People are working again. Some people are still not working. This is going to become more of an attractive option, I think, for a lot of homeowners, don't you?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, keep in mind, once these forbearances end, once the foreclosure moratoria end across the country, right, you're going to have to deal with this situation. And the statistics say that I think there's something like 2.5 or 3 million people who are still on forbearances, let alone the people that have these forbearances have ended and now they're trying to figure out how to deal with those forbearances. So we're talking about millions and millions of people that one way or another they're going to have to deal with. Forget about sort of what's happening from here on forward, because there's always been foreclosures. There's always been instances where people have life events that cause them to address these things. So it is absolutely critical that people try and get in front of this and try and deal, with an attorney. And I'll give you just a quick statistic that may be helpful for your audience. And it's just to give you a sense, right? So when the mortgage crisis hit and they had these, foreclosure mediation programs on the state level, which were by and large dealt with sort of like borrower to lender, right? Without any outside help. It was just sort of the person coming in, sitting down, trying to figure it out themselves, versus our court programs, right? So in these state foreclosure mediation programs, I believe nationally the success rate was less than 3%. Okay.
Wow, that's crazy.
In our bankruptcy programs, which had our systems where dealing with attorneys, it was about 70%.
Wow, what a difference.
Right. So we're not talking about 3% versus 6%, right? We're talking about orders of magnitude. And again, people need to keep in mind that this is about a process. This is about documenting your income, and every household is different, right? Your neighbor may have 2 wage earners and that's it. You may be self-employed and have your brother-in-law living in your basement contributing to the household, right?
Right.
The entire documentation of that package is going to be night and day. And if you don't document that information correctly, the servicer and the lender cannot review that information and therefore cannot make an accurate assessment. And a lot of times, some people may be listening to us here, and if they're borrowers themselves, they may be a little even confused by the whole notion. That's where the attorney comes in. That's where the experts come in. They can walk you through it, explain to you, well, this is why we need this here as opposed to that there. And that's again, to me, that's the benefit of having an expert work with you to get this. And again, a lot is at stake here. So I wouldn't risk doing that brain surgery on myself, right? I'd go find somebody that I thought was competent.
Well, and I love that I appreciate you keep harping on that, Igor, because if you think about it, some people do maybe not fully, we'll say appreciate or have had an experience even with an attorney. I know I've had a lot of clients say, I've never retained an attorney before. I don't really know what value that brings. So you heard it here first. Igor is explaining to you why you don't want to do this yourself. This is not a DIY project. This is very much is at stake. Its stakes are, I think, higher, especially when you're talking about loan modifications, because there's so many parties involved. So this is pretty serious stuff and interesting at the same time. One of the questions that came in, which is kind of an interesting question, is, do you think that President Biden's going to pass another stimulus package or some sort of rent/mortgage payment forgiveness program? I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, I'll give you my thoughts, but why don't you start?
Honestly, you can go ahead, because I won't even venture to guess. I think if I had the answers to those kinds of questions, I'd be probably getting paid big bucks to lobby in Washington. So I don't know. I mean, I think the reality of it is there have been a couple of programs, there have been a couple of extensions. I think when you look at the fact that there are some signs of unemployment coming down, the economy's rebounding to some level, although it's hard to say whether how equal that is across different economic brackets,
right?
Because the entire service industry has been disrupted, retail's been disrupted, right? Totally. I mean, who knows how many millions of jobs that affects, right? And who knows whether or not, if last year I had a job at a restaurant, as I was making X dollars, that I can find that job this year when there's fewer restaurants. And again, I don't know where people are going to go. And to me, that's the great unknown. But from, a legislative perspective, I think at some point, Biden and Congress and everybody else has got to be like, the system's got to flush itself out. We can only kick the can down the road for so long. And my sense is there's probably not a great appetite to keep doing this, because I think at some point everybody recognizes we have to start making these payments have to start being made somehow. You can't just keep kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, it's like to be determined. It's really hard to say. I mean, I also was a little surprised that the moratorium actually went through. The moratorium, it was supposed to be finished, I don't know, like 6 months ago. And here we are in June. I mean, I have plenty of clients that are landlords that are super frustrated by this. So if it's anything like the moratorium getting pushed down, a little bit longer, I could see a little bit more. But you're right. I mean, to some degree, this all has to be reset. And I don't think everyone fully understands or even do we know, if we had a crystal ball, we would tell you everybody, but the long-lasting effects of this COVID-19 pandemic. Because I think things are opening back up, but did you notice that a lot of people are still looking for help for their businesses? I mean, the people are trying to hire other people to work under them, but there's this unemployment that's out there that people are still on. So it's a catch-22, because it's going to take time, I think, to really reset. So do we think it's going to get passed? I don't know, but they certainly are going to have to regroup in the fall, I think, because, with fall, there'll be a different time of maybe more people getting vaccinated, maybe things are opening again, but I don't necessarily think it's going to reset that quickly. I think it's going to take time. Because we've been hit so hard, I don't think anybody was ready for something like this, so, including Congress.
I would almost say especially Congress, right? Yeah. I mean, the U.S. economy and the world economy is a massive, ocean, ship where, it doesn't turn on a dime, right? It's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take a little bit of time to see where we shake out. And, I get asked that question all the time. I think it's nearly impossible to predict what will happen. But I don't envision a whole lot more federal aid coming out, because at some point, I mean, you can't keep doing it, because to your point, you have landlords, people who own these properties,
they're suffering.
At some point, I know our focus is on the borrower side of things, but at some point when they can't make their payments because people aren't paying their rent or paying, it all starts to filter down. So I think we're getting to that point. So I think I would be surprised if there were more, moratoria or more forbearances, I think, we're getting to the point where folks need to expect to start, trying to get this back on track.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more and more people are, I know more people are getting employed, but still, I mean, I think there's going to be a push for helping and trying to maybe even pivoting to try to help people get back on their feet. I'm not sure about kicking it down the road either, because that's a great point. Because I think that's what some people are banking on. And unfortunately, there's only so much you can do, because if you think about it, like, this cannot be forever. I mean, it's been over a year. It's been over a year that the pandemic has been happening. So that's a great question. It's like such a can of worms to talk about something like that, because it's so hard to predict, I think.
For sure, Stephanie. And one of the things that I point out to your viewers, right? If you're in a position where you are still in a state that has a moratorium, or you're in a position where you still have forbearance, right? If you have employment and you think you can try and get back on your feet, now is the time, right, to try and address those issues, because you don't want to wait till there are millions of people applying for mortgage modifications at the same time. If you have an opportunity, get a hold of your finances, try and resolve it. I know the urge is there to say, hey, you know what, well, I can take another couple months, right? You're in my opinion, you're doing yourself a disservice, because now you have an opportunity where, and I'm not suggesting that the services aren't going to be able to handle it, right? But the reality of it is, if you have 10,000 pieces of paper versus 1 million pieces of paper, and you have the same number of people processing it, you're going to have more luck with when there's 10,000, and you can get, a better look than when there's 1 million. And, again, hopefully, regardless, there'll be opportunities to help people. But it is important that if you, don't put your head in the sand. And that's one of the things that I see way too many times. People are like, nobody's giving me an eviction notice. Nobody's coming to foreclose on me, right? That may be today. If you have the ability to pay, try and find a program that works for you, and try and get on your feet before it gets to a point where it's irreparable.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. I agree. And I think in general, I always tell clients, later never comes. People say, I'll do it later. But later never comes. Literally, like, something can happen to you. Something can happen in your circumstances. Maybe it gets worse, and later never comes. And you never ever can, plan for later, because sometimes you just don't ever do it. So I always tell people there's no better time than the present. So thank you so much for sharing that, Igor. If everybody anybody wants to contact you regarding the website, or even just about some of the things you mentioned today, where can they contact you?
They can give me a call. My phone number is 859-663-2928, 859-663-2928. They can go to our website at stretto.com and look me up under our experts, and send me an email there as well. Happy to help any way we can, and provide whatever information we can to help folks deal with this stuff. Like I said, we've helped, I don't even know how many tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people, navigate this process. And that's really what it is. It's really, we got into this, Stephanie, because the challenge we saw was not that the borrower and the lender didn't want to do this together. It was that, one was speaking Greek and another one was speaking French, right?
Right.
So there just was this, lack of communication and, missing documents, and people sometimes forget the logistics that are involved. Right. And, our systems and our products, what we do is we help people navigate those logistics and try and get you an answer as quickly as possible. And so happy to help any way we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and for everything that you are doing and have done for a lot of people, Igor. I think it's phenomenal. Even just to think that you basically created a gap between this loss in translation that was happening. I don't even think I really knew that was happening until we started talking about it. The fact that there is such a disconnect between the borrower and the lender, which really then impacts the final result. So that's kind of, that's the method to what you've been doing. So that's awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. It was always a pleasure speaking with you and educating our viewers. Really, I feel like you really educated me too in the process. I thank you so much for that. Thank you to the viewers for their questions. We always appreciate your comments and feedback. They always have good things to add, and people are really curious about some of the topics we cover. So we encourage you to come back next week. We're going to be talking to someone else, but you'll have to check out who that is when when I announce it. But it is going to be at 1 o'clock on Tuesday. And we always cherish the opportunity to work with you and help you with your needs, especially I always say, if I can't help you, I know someone who can. So just want to say thank you to everyone who's watching, and I invite you here for the same time, same place for Pink Mike Legal Confessions. And feel free to share these videos amongst your fellow friends, colleagues, parents, etc. Anyone, especially in this case, who may be in need of Igor's help or loan modifications, please have them contact us because we can certainly point you in the right direction. So Igor, again, thanks for your time, and I will hope to hopefully connect with you and send you some clients shortly.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Everyone have a great day. Thanks for your time.